So now that we've learned a little of JavaScript, let's actually put it to work, okay? Because the truth is we don't learn in isolation, we learn collectively. This is just kind of the way the world works when it comes to many things, but specifically software development. So you're working through these items, of course, and as an instructor, so I go right into the carbon footprint. Okay, so let me walk you through the setup. Okay, and then I'll start talking about the website. So I'm going to move over to VS Code. So at this point, no matter if you're using the code space or if you're using your local install, open either your code space. And now, for those of you doing code space, you need to have created a second code space for just your public repo. Okay, but I have mine locally, so I'm going to move over to VS Code. And I know it's my pub here, right, by the fact that I'm looking at the name. I don't have that base folder, that CIT93FA24. I actually have that pub open. Okay, and I showed that before, but I really kind of like to do this, but you can just open that base folder if you want. Now, when it comes to this week, what we're going to do is on the first week, on the Who's in the House, you created the week 1. So now, and you'll create another folder. It'll be W2. So you get used to the difference between creating a folder, creating a file, understanding where your current selection is and how that affects the location of where that gets created. Okay, because if I was in week 1 and I hit folder, then it would create that folder inside of week 1. And what you want is you want that week 2 folder to be at the same level as week 1. Okay, and to do that, you can click here, right? Click that folder, and then that will create it at that same level. Now, once you create the folder, then you'll create that index file. And in that index file, you'll also want to create that, include that script tag that we did to point to the main.js file. Okay, so get all those things set up, and then, right, so get your index file. Again, this is stuff you've already done, so this is where it's, I'm challenging you, hopefully now that you've learned, and if you need help, either review the stuff that we've done before or come get help. So you create your index file, you write your script tag that, remember there was another attribute called defer that we had on there. And in the main.js, at least for this one, you could do a console.log or something so that you know that your JS file is indeed correctly linked from your HTML. And then what I'm going to do is I have my terminal open and I'm going to go ahead and start go live. Okay, and this will open up. Now this is pretty, okay. Now different than what I showed, because remember, what we're working on here is local. So if I go to week 2, okay, W2, there's nothing in here because I haven't written any code. I actually have written some comments, which I'll just kind of show you what those are. And harping back to the importance of understanding the dev tools, I'm going to hit inspect, okay. And the way I like to have mine set up here is I actually like to have the drawer set up. So I like to have the sources here. There's my code. Right now there's only comments, and I like to have my console because that helps me troubleshoot my code. Okay, so that's the setup I have in order to move on. So now what you want to do is commit this. So you can go ahead and commit this. So you do your git workflow, your git add, your git commit, and your commit messages set up done. Okay. All right, so now let's actually talk about the carbon footprint. So in here, I'm going to go over to here, and then this gives you, actually they updated it recently, that's kind of cool. So this is method 1. There's actually a method 2 below, but we're only for this purpose, we're going to use method 1 of calculating the carbon footprint. So what you'll have is count the number of members, and I'll give you I'm not going to write the code, but I'll give you, the idea, because you're going to create variables. We're actually not going to write the logic that does this for now, because that's what we're going to do as we learn more how to write JavaScript. We're just going to create variables, and in there you'll look through here and then give it the point value based on your particular, right? How many people, how many members of your household. If you live alone, right, add 14 points. If you share a house with people, right, with one other person, then it's 12 points. Okay. All right. So you go through that. You'll do 1, 2, right, 3 food choices. And again, what you want to do is just read through this and give your answer. And again, I'll show you how to write just give you the overview. 4, 5, determine household purchases. That's probably the one that got me the most. How much waste do you produce, right? And then 7 is the amount of waste you recycle. I love this, right? And then tally up your transportation costs. And then the last step is actually to add up the points. So what I'm going to show you is just this concept of how to add things up in JavaScript, and just to give you an example. Okay, so again, method 1, do 1 through 9 just as variables with declaring the variable, right, and then assigning a point value to it based on the instruction. So now let me move over to VS Code. So what I did, and I'm going to tell you that part of what I want you to do for this work is do some comments. Now I just did these comments, right? You're welcome to kind of look at that and see. And the reason I commented each one was so that I could then come in here and write code. Now, if you want to do it another way, that's fine, as long as I see some comments in your code. So if you remember when we were talking about variables, I said we have a variable rule. And the general variable rule is you use const. Okay? Now, the name that you give to this will be based on using camel case, but also you don't want to just do value like 1, right? Why wouldn't you want to do that? Because when somebody else comes around, they won't actually be able to just look at your code and know what it represents, right? So if you, as an example, said 14 here, and by the way, semicolons are required, right? I mean, yes, would this technically work? Sure, but it's not good, right, declarative code, or it's not readable code. And you really, part of what you want is to have your code be readable by somebody else. And because we've given it comments, we've made it more readable, but what you really want to do is make these, so I'm giving you a bad example, which is not a good idea, but if I was to give like my, I could maybe give in-house, and this is where it's like, how long do you make these variables, right? My house members. Okay, I'll just give you the first one. Now, come up with your own. You don't have to use mine. As long as you use camel case, you use const. Again, what you're doing here is you're assigning this variable this value. Okay, so you'll end up doing, again, you get to do your comments the way you want. And then at the end, you will then do, right, create, and I would do something like total, or I might do something like carbon footprint total, something like that, right, equals. Now, at this point, now you're going to take each of these variable names that you've created and just add them. Right? So you might say my household members plus whatever your next variable is, Okay? So that's your job for the most part for what you need to do here. Again, I'm going to let you create your variable names and do this the way you want. This is how you add. The last step of what you're going to do here, right, and I'm actually not going to include that for now, is then you write, because we've done this as well, you write JavaScript to render, right, to update the render HTML to include that total and maybe some content, right? And you've learned how to do that in the work that we did just on week 1 as well. And I believe we showed a little bit. Actually, this week we didn't show it, so you can look back to week 1 to see how we did that. As a matter of fact, if you go here, actually, I didn't have it in there. Not a good example, but you can harp back on that because we got it off the website. So play with that again if you need some help, okay? Okay, so then once you get all that done, so let's come back over here, right? So use camel case, create variable names that tell the reader of your code this is what I went over. You also need to code the update to the HTML. Okay, so let me just say a word about this before you do it. Doing this where you come over and you do like H1, right, and you do total is a number is not correct. This is what we call hard coding. And what you want to do is actually use code, right? And you could maybe do, actually you could do a H1 with a heading that says my total is, right? And then maybe an H2, and then this H2 might be what you update. Again, play with this because we've learned enough now for you to know how to do this once you have that total, okay? Again, ask for help if you need it. Okay, so once you get that working, right, make sure you have working code, reach out if you need help, consider asking on Discord, and then commit with coding is done, okay? Now that your coding is done, you're ready to actually share your link. And this is where in the beginning of the week, I showed you how to get that URL. I do actually still have that open, okay? So in this case, right, I would have, so let me say this up here. This URL is for your live server. And it's hard because it won't make this bigger. But this URL, if you shared this URL, only you can see this on your local system. It's not a URL that renders your work so anyone can see it, which is it's the most important reason why we created through Pages that URL, okay? So what you would do is do your get workflow, and then over here where we in attendance did week 1, now you would, once you have working code, you've pushed it to GitHub, right? Then when you hit enter here, now, and then again, I haven't pushed this, right? You should be able to then see that updated carbon footprint number here. You should be able to go into inspect, make sure you don't have any, go into sources, right? Make sure there's no errors, right? Walk through your code and look at it. So this is really where you take the concepts that we've learned and you, right, learn more about them. Again, the way I set this up is actually until you hit reply and post, and by the way, when you hit reply here, you would then, let me copy that, right? So let me just, just to be clear, right, that's the URL for me. Now mine's not pushed, so you wouldn't see it yet. And remember, if you're doing this, which is your live server, is not correct, okay? Because only you can see that link. So that's not the way to do it, okay? All right, so then what you want to do here is say something in your post, right, about just doing this work or anything you experienced through doing it, right? So get that work. Now, until you do your reply, you won't be able to see anybody else's post because I'm really trying to give a structure so that you do the coding, right? Reach out for help. But then once you've done it, go look at somebody else's code because you really learn so much from looking at somebody else's code. You might be amazed, like the different approaches you'll see here. All right, so 85 points for the working code, working link, the code that meets, I should ever change that, the requirements above, and 15 for the replies. So you need to do 2 replies here, right? So this is where people work a little ahead of the time. I will hopefully be able to go in there and also give you feedback because that's something I do is I look at your code as well. And the sooner you do this, if there's something in there, right, maybe you've come and seen me, maybe you didn't, and I had a chance to look at it. And this is really best, if you can do it 24 hours ahead of time, that of course works best. But I know not everybody, doesn't do that doesn't work for everybody. But for those who do, you get more feedback. All right, hope this helps, and I look forward to seeing your work. See you later.